Good morning, everybody. Brian of London here in my park in Tel Aviv, Bereshit Forest. And welcome, Johnny Gould. Who else? Wow. Okay, lots to talk about today because, firstly, for 3 days last week, I was in Jerusalem every day, getting up at the crack of dawn, driving. Takes about an hour. If you leave Tel Aviv at 6:15, you can be parked in Jerusalem at 7:15. If you leave Tel Aviv at 7, hour and a half, sometimes 2 to get to Jerusalem. That's why I got up and left at 6:15. And I was at an event organized by the Government Press Office of Israel, the official liaison for all journalists in Israel. And Israel has too many journalists, foreign journalists. That's just a fact. One of the first people who spoke to us on the first day that I was there was Matty Friedman, who blew the whistle on all this stuff. And he points out in his talk, back when he was working for the Associated Press, there are more journalists for the Associated Press covering just Israel than the whole of Africa or China, or India. Countries with more than 1 billion people get fewer journalists than this little slither of land. And the reason is because it's a great place to cover for the journalists. And lots happening in Africa too. Africa's got almost no journalists, literally fewer journalists for the whole of Africa than for this tiny little bit of land. Anyway, that's part of the thing. So I was doing that. First, I'm just going to cover the Tommy Robinson bit right at the top, because that'll segue into some things I want to say about this government press tour of Israel. By the way, it was a government press event for Jewish media. It's called the Jewish Media Summit. So these were predominantly Jewish journalists, or journalists writing for overtly Jewish outlets around the world, from South Africa and Mexico and Venezuela. No one from Venezuela. So Mexico, Hungary, Germany, England, America, obviously, all of that stuff. But the Tommy thing. The reason I became aware of the Tommy thing was I get alerts on when they put Tommy's name in a headline. So I got an alert about Tommy's name from The Sun. And what the Sun did was, it was this story about this video from Huddersfield of a white, I don't like saying white, but a white boy grabbing a Syrian refugee, apparently, by the neck and pouring water on his face. Terrible, bullying, horrible video. But The Sun, for some reason, shared that story with the headline that said Tommy Robinson -supporting. And they managed, and they've changed their headline since, but they managed to make the story first about Tommy Robinson. So I look at this thing, and it was just this kid who did this thing in the video, apparently 3 months ago, had shared something of Tommy's at some point, as many millions of people in the UK have done. And that was enough to bring Tommy into the story. But then Tommy actually got into the story and started looking, and he heard from all these people saying that there's a Muslim gang bullying problem at the school, and that maybe this kid, the one who was attacked in the video that the press have highlighted, might not be so innocent after all. I don't know. I just don't know the details yet. Tommy's going to have to flesh those out, do some interviews, really dig into it, but he will dig into it in the way that the mainstream media is not going to do, because the mainstream media is going to move on. They got their story. Their story was white kid beats up Syrian refugee. Great story, move on. And this made me see an exact parallel to what goes on here all the time. And the story that the media want is powerful, evil Israeli Jews beating up powerless Palestinians. That's the story. That's the media. That's the line. That's the inversion that we got after 67. That's the inversion of the David and Goliath thing up until 67, or just before. We, the Jews, were the little David facing, because David was Jewish after all in the story, remember? King David, he became King David of the Jews. Up to 67, we were the little David facing off against the entire Arab world, because when we fought the War of Independence, we didn't fight against Palestinians. There was no Palestinian nation, or the Palestinian cause hadn't really even been named yet. as the Palestinians. We fought against the Arab armies, Syria, Egypt, Jordan, Iraq, proper armies, Iran, real, they're not Arab, I know. We fought against proper armies. But by 67, what they managed to do was turn it and invert it. And we became the Goliath because they had invented this tiny little thing called the Palestinian people. Where did they come from? 1964, the PLO, creation of the PLO. There's no real literature that goes back strongly before then. Any references to Palestinians, say, in the 40s or even in the start of the State of Israel, mean Jews. Jews were the Palestinians. Anyway, that inversion. So the way the media do this, and this was laid out in Matty Friedman's talk, which I will find the video for and sort of highlight and present later in a proper video. What he says, and he's so right, is that the media don't have time to go into the history. They don't have time to explain all of this to you. They don't want to explain old stuff. What they do is they focus in time and in geography on too small a thing. Israel is not the root cause of all the problems in the Middle East. If the Israeli-Palestinian thing was solved tomorrow, Syrians would still be killing each other, and ISIS would still be trying to take over, and Iran and Saudi Arabia would still be at each other's throats. Solving the Palestine-Israel thing wouldn't help those problems. But the media focus in so narrowly, and they make this, and they focus in time and in geography, and they never tell the backstory enough. So it may be the case that you know, bullying is terrible and all of this stuff, but we just don't know the story from Huddersfield. We don't know enough of the backstory to know what was going on. And the same thing is what happens, what's always presented to you by the BBC. You know, you see a retaliation, you don't see the backstory, you don't see the provocations, you don't see what we go through. And I tell you this though, the mood in Israel is that the vast majority of Israelis, Hebrew-speaking, non-overseas-based Israelis, they don't give a crap anymore about your media. They don't care what the BBC says about us. They just assume it will be negative. So, as I segue into what the sorry, I have to have a sip of coffee. What the press office put together, great. So the first day was a conference thing in a conference hall in Jerusalem, actually in the Yemeni, what used to be the Yemenite bit of Jerusalem, just outside the walls, with a gorgeous view. But we were in a cave underground with no cell phone reception and poor Wi-Fi. That was a good program, relatively good. There were some fireworks because a far-left guy from the Haaretz newspaper had a go at Caroline Glick, who I like a lot and quote often. Told her that she was living in an illegal house because of where it's built, which is just totally untrue. But the second day was, I chose to go on a tour of the Judea and Samaria, the Shtachim, what some people outside call the West Bank, erroneously. The land illegally occupied by Jordan from 1948 to 67. And it was a very good balanced tour. We heard from the guy who built the wall, the general who was in charge of building the separation fence, which in some places is a wall. He told us the sort of design decisions, how it was designed, why it was necessary after the massive suicide bombings and the more than 1,000 dead from the second intifada of blowing up buses and restaurants. And the wall and the separation fence, even though they're not complete, even though you can walk around them, have dramatically cut that, because what they've done is they've given the Israeli, the bloody illegal settlements. I was in and they're not illegal, and you can't find a court. Anyway, I'll go on to that. The wall is just a force multiplier. It allows us to police a larger area and to stop bad people coming to the central part of Israel with fewer resources. We can do a better job. That means we have to go into their towns less, still have to go in though, but we can police it, and it has cut their ability to carry out mass bombing attacks. I mean, they still get through with a knife from time to time, but that's still, we haven't hermetically sealed them. Anyway, we also then went off up to one of the towns up in the Gush Etzion block, which Gush Etzion, I've told the history before. Gush Etzion is a part of Israel that Jews had been living in, had gone back to in the 1800s, rebuilt some beautiful little towns up there, and then basically in 1948 in the War of Independence we did not have the manpower and the firepower and the weapons to hold it. So the Jordanian army, trained, equipped with British help, backing them up, they managed to take Gush Etzion and occupy it from 48 to 67 in an occupation that I think nobody except Britain and Pakistan recognized the occupation by Jordan, the illegal occupation. And while they were there, now you have to understand, I'm going to tell just a short bit more about land, if I'm still got you on board, and then that'll be enough for now. And that whole territory, and in fact all of Israel still uses Turkish land law. Britain came in 1917 and kicked out the Turks. The Turks lost, they sided with the wrong side in the First World War, and so Britain basically took Israel as its own under what was called the Palestine Mandate in 1917 and ran it. But they never really imposed British law on it. So for land purposes, land registry, we were mostly on Turkish land registry, which was the last sovereign power, real sovereign country that ran this land until 1948 when Jews declared a sovereign state. Now, the Turkish administrative borders of Palestine include all of what is now today Jordan. So there was never ever an international border along the West Bank River or even inside it into what some people today still refer to as the Green Line. That border just didn't exist in any international sense and has never existed in an international sense. So, but the land law that we followed has been basically Turkish. But then in the bits that Jordan occupied and Egypt in Gaza, they came with their own thing. And basically the king of Jordan handed out packets of land, and they came with a condition that you actually had to either move there or farm there, and then you had to pay taxes to the king of Jordan. And this was for two purposes. One, it was for the king to raise taxes, and two, it was to cement clan loyalties in the area. So he would just give out land to people he wanted to buy the loyalty of. That's how Arab culture and civilization has worked for centuries or millennia even. It's very obvious. I mean, it's a sort of feudal system. But most of those people who got those parcels of land, and they sometimes came with a piece of paper, did not fulfill the two things that they had to do, which was either farm them, live on them, or pay taxes. They had to do any of that stuff. They never did it. Now, what happens in 1967 when Israel releases that land, becomes the sovereign power over it, doesn't annex it, and this is all technical international legal stuff. It's not illegal. It's not an illegal occupation. It's whether it's an occupation or administration. The language only matters if you are an international lawyer, but it's not an illegal occupation. There's never been a court that had jurisdiction over the area that could decide that it was. So the Israeli Supreme Court could decide, but it has chosen not to. And even when it's the most leftist it's been, and with Arab Supreme Courts, it's never actually decided that it was an illegal occupation. Anyway, the whole thing is actually basically a mess, because we never really said, okay, enough with this Turkish law, enough with recognizing Turkish land and recognizing gifts of the king. This is where the phrase private Palestinian land comes from. These were what is now called private Palestinian land is often land handed out as a gift by the king of Jordan. Skip forward now. A lot of it is state land that nobody had ever claimed. There was never any paperwork to back it up, and that the Israeli government says is state land, and it has allowed building on it. It has even helped building on it. It's built roads and when you get up there, the main thing that you see and this is what I say a lot often, I've said this in many podcasts and things, and I can only show it to you if you come here, it's empty. There's a lot of land up there, but such is the nature of the beast that there are these left-wing organizations funded by all of the European governments and the EU directly that want to stop Israel and Jews living on our land, Judea Samaria, the ancient heartlands of the Bible. They do everything possible. They go in the middle of the night and plant a small little olive tree and say they've been farming it for generations. It's bullshit. You can see from the land, it's mostly barren and rocky, and nobody's Nobody's farming it. But every time a Jew sits down and builds a house, 400 meters away, an Arab wants to go and plant a tree so that he can someday later claim and stop an expansion. In the end, we also heard on this tour, which was fantastic, we had a good hour and a half with a Palestinian Arab who lives out there in one of the towns, one of the more friendly towns. He says, we can get along, there's no problem, there's no friction. What drives friction is the Palestinian Authority, who are stealing all the money, and the billions and billions that goes to them just gets filtered away. This is a Palestinian man saying this to us with a translation. And when you get them away from the herd, that's what you hear. And then coupled with that is our own ultra far left, ideologically insane Jews and NGOs that just don't like the idea of us Jews living there. And when I look around Israeli society, as far as I can see, the people most closely aligned and able to live with Arabs in some kind of peace are now the Jews living over the line in what the world calls settlements. Settlement didn't used to be a negative word, but they're just towns and villages. It was a good tour. We saw a great deal of stuff. We saw some stupid stuff. People whose house, had to demolish houses because retrospectively, years later, a group called Shalom Achshav, Peace Now, had found some Palestinian who could come along and claim that he had a slither of land 1 meter wide that ran through 14 houses. So they knocked the houses down. They're going to rebuild them a meter to the left. Who gained? What did Shalom Achshav gain by that? What they're trying to do is make the cost of staying there too high. But I can tell you from the heart of the people that you meet out there, whether they're religious, and some of them are not religious, they're not all bearded, weird-looking people. They're just normal, modern Orthodox Jews and non-Orthodox Jews out there too. They live there because they love it. It's a beautiful place, beautiful views, open spaces, not crowded like Tel Aviv. There's no, you've been killing them, you're stabbing them. You stabbed my friend in the back 2 months ago. The price is not too high. There's no price you can make that's too high that will get them to move off our land. Just forget about it. You're wasting everybody's time, money, and effort. There's plenty of land. The Arabs can have all the agricultural land and all the land they want for as many people as they can breed. There is not going to be a run out of land. And same for Jews to live out there. And the infrastructure can be better. And all you're doing, Peace Now and the other groups like it, all you're doing is slowing an inevitable advancement for both peoples. You're keeping the Arabs back, you're screwing their quality of life by making them live under a Palestinian leadership that steals from them. And you're just delaying the inevitable. The inevitable is that Jews will be living there for a long time to come, forever, I hope. And that's it. I'm Brian of London. I'm in my park. I got to have a chat with someone, and I'll be saying a lot more about that tour I was on and the whole event. And thanks very much to my patrons, and thank you to everyone who answered my question about spectacles. In 3 weeks, you'll see which ones I chose, or you can find the tweets. But yeah, thank you for weighing in. Going for a bit of a change because I need varifocals. I'm getting old. All right, bye for now. Brian of London in my park.